The forest held its breath as 10-year-old Marcus John disappeared between one heartbeat and the next, his small bundle of kindling scattered across the pine needle carpet like broken promises. His older brother Daniel, only 13 himself, would replay that moment for the next 17 years, how Marcus had been just 15 feet away, humming their mother's lullaby. When the woods simply swallowed him whole. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip. The Chun family had driven up to Whispering Pines National Forest for their annual autumn retreat, a tradition that had started when the boys were toddlers. David Chun, a meticulous accountant who planned everything down to the last detail, had mapped out their campsite, checked weather reports 3 times, and packed enough supplies for a small army. His methodical nature had been a source of gentle teasing from his wife Sarah, but she secretly loved how he fussed over every detail of their family adventures. Sarah Chun, a gentle kindergarten teacher with worry lines that deepened with each passing year, had insisted on bringing extra blankets and Marcus's favorite stuffed elephant, despite the boy's protests that he was too old for such things. She had a teacher's instinct for what children needed, even when they didn't know it themselves. At 38, she still possessed the kind of nurturing warmth that made children gravitate toward her, and parents trust her implicitly with their most precious possessions. The Chun family had been camping at Whispering Pines for 8 years running, ever since Daniel was 5 and Marcus was 2. It had become their sacred tradition, a chance to disconnect from the world and reconnect with each other. David would take time off from his accounting firm. Sarah would leave her lesson plans behind, and for one perfect week each October, they would live simply among the trees. The campsite they favored was tucked into a grove of towering pines, with a small creek running nearby and a perfect view of the mountains. David had chosen it carefully their first year, studying topographical maps and reading reviews from other campers. Safety was always his primary concern. The site was close enough to the main road for emergencies, but far enough away to feel like genuine wilderness. Marcus had always been the cautious one, content to stay close to his parents, while Daniel explored with the fearless confidence of an older child. Where Daniel would climb the highest rocks and wade into the deepest parts of the creek, Marcus preferred to collect interesting stones and leaves, creating elaborate displays around their campsite. He had an artist's eye for beauty, often arranging his findings in patterns that made Sarah smile and shake her head in wonder. The morning Marcus vanished had dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made the maples look like they were on fire. The family had woken to the sound of birds calling through the mist, and David had already started coffee on their camp stove by the time the boys stirred in their sleeping bags. Sarah had made pancakes on the portable griddle, Marcus's favorite, and they had all eaten breakfast, watching the sun burn through the fog dot after breakfast. David had suggested the boys gather firewood while he and Sarah broke down the tents. It was a routine they'd followed countless times before, a way to teach the boys responsibility while giving the adults a chance to pack without small hands helping. Daniel, responsible beyond his years, had nodded and grabbed his younger brother's hand. "Stay close," he'd warned Marcus, though he needn't have bothered. His little brother was cautious by nature, afraid of spiders and loud noises, a kind of child who checked under his bed twice before sleeping. Marcus had been collecting sticks methodically, creating neat piles according to size, when he'd called out to Daniel, "I see some good ones over here." His voice had carried through the morning air, bright with excitement. He'd spotted a fallen branch that would burn perfectly, just the kind of find that would make their father proud. Daniel had looked up from his own pile of branches, about to remind Marcus not to wander too far, when he realized he was talking to empty air. The forest had gone unnaturally quiet, as if every bird and insect had suddenly decided to hold its breath. Even the wind had stopped moving through the trees, leaving a silence so complete it seemed to press against Daniel's eardrums. "Marcus?" Daniel had called, his voice cracking slightly. "Marcus, where are you?" The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel would later tell investigators that it felt like the forest had been holding its breath, waiting for something terrible to happen. He had run toward the spot where he'd last seen his brother, calling his name with increasing panic. The bundle of kindling Marcus had been carrying was scattered across the ground, but there was no sign of the boy himself. "Mom! Dad!" Daniel's scream had shattered the morning stillness, bringing David and Sarah running through the trees. They found their older son standing in a small clearing, turning in circles, his face white with terror. "Where's Marcus?" Sarah had asked, though. She already knew from Daniel's expression that something was horribly wrong. "He was right here," Daniel had said, his voice barely a whisper. "He was right here, and then he was gone." What happened next became a blur of frantic searching, screamed names, and the gradual arrival of park rangers, local police, and eventually the FBI. The first park ranger to arrive was Thomas Hartley, a 20-year veteran who had seen his share of missing hikers and lost children. Something about this case felt different from the moment he saw the scattered kindling and the Chun's terrified faces. "We need to move fast," Hartley had told his supervisor over the radio. "We've got a 10-year-old missing in terrain that could hide a dozen children. Weather's supposed to turn tonight." The initial search was chaotic, but thorough. Rangers established a perimeter around the campsite and began working outward in expanding circles. Search dogs were brought in within hours, their handlers optimistic that the fresh scent trail would lead them quickly to the missing boy. But the dogs seemed confused, circling the area where Marcus had vanished before losing the trail entirely. "It's like he just stopped existing," one handler told Detective Rita Vasquez, who had arrived to coordinate the investigation. "The dogs can follow his scent to that clearing, but then it's like he vanished into thin air." Detective Vasquez had seen missing children cases before, but something about Marcus Chon's disappearance felt different. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away from the scattered kindling, no torn clothing caught on branches. It was as if the child had simply ceased to exist in one spot and failed to exist anywhere else. Sarah Chun collapsed twice during the first day, her body simply giving out under the weight of terror. The first time she had been calling Marcus's name when her legs buckled and she fell to the forest floor, sobbing. The second time she had been standing with a group of volunteers when someone mentioned that children sometimes fell into old wells or mine shafts. The possibility that her son might be trapped somewhere, hurt and calling for help, had overwhelmed her completely. David transformed into a man possessed, organizing search parties with military precision, refusing to eat or sleep until someone forced him. He had printed hundreds of copies of Marcus's most recent school photo and distributed them to every volunteer, every law enforcement officer, every journalist who showed up to cover the story. His accountant's mind had kicked into overdrive, creating spreadsheets to track which areas had been searched, which leads had been followed, which witnesses had been interviewed. But despite their efforts, despite the dozens of volunteers who combed the forest for days, despite the helicopters that circled overhead and the bloodhounds that followed every possible trail, Marcus Chun remained missing. The search continued for 2 weeks before being officially scaled back, though the Chuns refused to give up hope. Detective Vasquez had worked missing persons cases for 15 years, and she knew the statistics. Children who disappeared in wilderness areas were usually found within the first 48 hours, either safe or dead. Those who remained missing after a week were rarely found at all. But something about Marcus's case nagged at her, a feeling that they were missing something important. The forest around Whispering Pines was known for its complex cave systems, carved over millennia by underground streams. Many of the caves were unmapped, hidden behind rockfalls or concealed by dense vegetation. But search teams had dismissed the possibility that Marcus had fallen into a cave. There were no known entrances in the area where he had vanished, and a 10-year-old wouldn't have the strength or knowledge to access the deeper cave systems. Children don't just vanish, Detective Vasquez told her partner, Detective Mike Torres, as they examined the scene for the dozenth time. There's always something, a trail, a witness, evidence of what happened. People don't disappear into thin air. But Marcus Chun had left no trail. The search continued for weeks, then months. Psychics called claiming to have visions of the boy in various locations around the country. False leads came in from across the nation. A gas station attendant in Nevada was certain he'd seen a boy matching Marcus's description. A school bus driver in Maine swore she'd picked up a child who looked just like him. Each lead was investigated thoroughly and came to nothing. The media attention was intense but brief. For 2 weeks, Marcus Chun's face was on every news program, his story told and retold by reporters who struggled to find new angles on a mystery, with no clues. Then a celebrity scandal broke. A hurricane struck the Gulf Coast, and Marcus's story faded from the headlines. The Chun family found themselves dealing with their tragedy in relative privacy, which was both a blessing and a curse. Chun family never recovered from that day. Sarah quit her teaching job, unable to bear the sight of children Marcus's age. She had tried to return to her classroom 3 months after the disappearance, but the moment she saw her students' faces, she had broken down completely. Every child reminded her of Marcus. Every empty desk seemed to echo with his absence. Instead, Sarah spent her days driving through small towns, showing Marcus's picture to anyone who would look. She kept boxes of flyers in her car, his smiling face reproduced thousands of times on cheap paper. She haunted truck stops and diners, grocery stores and gas stations, always hoping that someone would recognize her son, would remember seeing him somewhere, would give her the one piece of information that would bring him home. David threw himself into his work with obsessive intensity, but his colleagues noticed how he'd stop mid-sentence sometimes, staring out windows as if expecting to see his son walking up the street. He had always been methodical, but now he was compulsive, checking and rechecking his calculations, staying at the office until midnight, taking on clients' problems as if solving them might somehow solve the mystery of his missing son. Their marriage, once strong and loving, began to fracture under the weight of their grief. They processed their loss differently. Sarah needed to talk about Marcus constantly, to keep his memory alive through conversation, while David found it too painful to speak his son's name. They went to counseling, but the therapist couldn't bridge the gap between their different ways of mourning. Daniel, barely a teenager himself, became the family's emotional anchor. He held his parents together through sheer force of will, making sure they ate, helping with the endless paperwork that comes with a missing child case, and never, ever giving up hope. But the guilt was eating him alive. He'd been the older brother, the responsible one. How had he let Marcus disappear? The guilt manifested in nightmares that left Daniel screaming in the middle of the night, panic attacks that struck without warning, and a crushing sense of responsibility that made him feel decades older than his 13 years. He started seeing a counselor, a kind woman named Dr. Patricia Reeves, who specialized in trauma in children. "It's not your fault," Dr. Reeves told him during one of their sessions. "You were just a child yourself. You couldn't have prevented what happened." But Daniel didn't believe her. He had been the older brother, the one their parents trusted to keep Marcus safe. He had failed in the most fundamental way possible, and that failure haunted every moment of his life. The first anniversary of Marcus's disappearance brought a fresh wave of media attention. Local news stations ran segments asking, "Where is Marcus Chun?" His school held a memorial service, planting a tree in his honor. The Chun family established a foundation to help other families of missing children, pouring their grief into action, hoping that helping others might somehow ease their own pain. But as the months turned to years, the case grew cold. Detective Vasquez retired, handing the file to Detective Torres, who eventually passed it on to others. The physical evidence, the scattered kindling, the crime scene photos, the witness statements gathered dust in a storage room. The Shun family moved away from their old house, unable to bear the memories contained in every room. They relocated to Portland, Oregon, where David found work with a larger accounting firm, and Sarah eventually returned to teaching, though she never quite regained her former warmth with her students. The move was meant to be a fresh start, but they carried their grief with them like a weight that never grew lighter. That Daniel grew up carrying the weight of that day. He excelled in school, as if academic achievement might somehow make up for his perceived failure as a brother. He was popular with his classmates, but never close to anyone, always holding part of himself back, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. How could he trust in permanence when his brother had vanished between one moment and the next? When it came time to choose a college major, Daniel surprised everyone by selecting forestry and park management. His parents worried that he was torturing himself, surrounding himself with reminders of the worst day of their lives. But Daniel felt called to the wilderness, drawn by something he couldn't quite name. "I need to understand," he told his parents. "I need to know how someone can just disappear." He became a park ranger himself, working in various locations throughout the Pacific Northwest. He specialized in search and rescue operations, becoming known for his methodical approach and his refusal to give up on missing persons cases. His colleagues respected his dedication, though they sometimes worried about the intensity he brought to every search. Daniel married a kind woman named Elena Rodriguez, whom he met during a search operation where she was working as a paramedic. Elena understood trauma, having seen her share of tragedy in her medical career. She recognized the pain Daniel carried and loved him despite it, or perhaps because of it. Their courtship was careful and slow, with Daniel always waiting for Elena to decide he was too damaged, too haunted by his past. But Elena was patient, understanding that healing came in its own time. When Daniel finally told her about Marcus, she held him as he cried for the first time in years. They had 2 children, a boy named David after his grandfather, and a girl named Sarah after her grandmother. Daniel was the most protective father anyone had ever seen, never letting his children out of his sight during camping trips, always knowing exactly where they were, always prepared for the worst-case scenario. Elena worried sometimes that Daniel's protectiveness would suffocate their children, but she understood its source. The man she loved had learned as a child that terrible things could happen in an instant. That vigilance was the price of safety. She tried to balance his anxiety with her own more relaxed approach to parenting, creating a home where their children felt both safe and free. Meanwhile, the forest kept its secrets. Seasons changed, trees grew taller, and the spot where Marcus had been collecting firewood became just another patch of woodland. The memorial tree planted by his school grew from a sapling to a mature oak, its branches reaching toward the sky, like arms stretched in supplication. Occasionally, hikers would report strange sounds in the air, a child's laughter carried on the wind, or the faint sound of humming. Park rangers would investigate, but find nothing. The stories became local legend, whispered around campfires, and dismissed by rational people as the product of overactive imaginations and guilt-stricken consciences. But Thomas Hartley, the park ranger who had been first on the scene 17 years earlier, began to notice a pattern in the reports. The sightings were always in the same general area, always involved someone small and quick, always ended with the figure disappearing into the forest before anyone could get a clear look. Hartley was nearing retirement after 30 years of service, and he had seen enough strange things in the wilderness to know that the forest held mysteries beyond human understanding. He started keeping a private log of the sightings, noting dates and locations, looking for patterns that might reveal the truth behind the stories. Sarah Chun never stopped looking. Even after David passed away from a heart attack at 52, the doctor said it was stress-related, but everyone knew it was a broken heart. She continued her solitary search. She'd grown thin and gray, her teacher's gentle demeanor replaced by the hollow-eyed intensity of someone who'd lost everything. David's death hit the family like a second tragedy. He had been the steady one, the planner, the one who kept the household running while Sarah searched. And Daniel struggled with his guilt. His passing left a hole in their lives that seemed impossible to fill. The funeral was small and sad, attended by colleagues and a few family friends. Daniel spoke about his father's dedication to finding Marcus, how he had never given up hope, despite the passage of years. Elena tried to convince Sarah to move in with them, to be close to her grandchildren, but Sarah couldn't sit still. She had to keep moving, keep searching. "He's out there," she would tell Daniel during their weekly phone calls. "I can feel it. A mother knows these things. I would know if he were dead." Daniel wanted to believe her, but 17 years was a long time. He'd read the statistics, consulted with experts, studied every aspect of missing persons cases. Missing. Children who aren't found in the first 48 hours are rarely found alive. Those who disappear in wilderness areas face even worse odds. But he'd learned not to argue with his mother. Hope was all she had left, and he wouldn't be the one to take it away. The discovery that changed everything came on a Tuesday in March, 17 years and 5 months after Marcus vanished. A team of graduate students from the university's geology department was conducting a comprehensive cave survey in the Whispering Pines area, mapping underground systems for their master's thesis projects. The caves in that region were known to be extensive, but many had never been fully explored or documented. The project was led by Dr. Amanda Foster, a respected geologist who had spent her career studying karst formations and underground water systems. She had brought 6 graduate students to the area for a month-long survey, planning to use advanced equipment to map cave systems that had been largely ignored by previous researchers. Jennifer Walsh, a 23-year-old graduate student with a passion for spelunking, was the first to squeeze through a narrow opening they discovered behind a rockfall. The passage was tight, requiring her to crawl on her belly for nearly 50 feet before it opened into a larger chamber. Her headlamp illuminated flowstone formations and limestone walls that had been carved by water over millions of years. She was taking photographs for her documentation when she saw its scratches in the stone wall that didn't look natural. Marks were too regular, too purposeful to be the result of natural erosion or animal activity. Moving closer, she realized they were letters, carved deep into the limestone with what must have been a sharp rock or piece of metal. The letters were crude, clearly done by someone with limited tools, but they were unmistakable. Marcus Chenage 10H LPME Jennifer's scream echoed through the cave system, bringing her fellow researchers running. Dr. Foster rappelled down into the cave herself, her years of experience allowing her to navigate the tight passage with practiced ease. When she saw the carving, she immediately understood its significance. "Get me the sheriff's department," she told one of her students, "and the FBI. This is a crime scene now." The discovery made national news within hours. The story of Marcus Chun, the boy who had vanished 17 years earlier, was suddenly front-page news again. The FBI reopened the case. Cave rescue teams were brought in from across the region, and the Chun family was contacted immediately. Sarah Chun, now 68 and living in a small apartment in Portland, collapsed when she got the call. She had been preparing for another day of searching, as she had every day for 17 years. when her phone rang with news that would change everything. Daniel drove through the night to reach the forest. Elena beside him, their own children left with Elena's mother. The drive was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional sob from the passenger seat. Elena held Daniel's hand as he drove, both of them trying to process what the discovery might mean. The cave where Marcus's name was found was located approximately 2 miles from where he had vanished, but the entrance was hidden behind a rockfall that investigators estimated had occurred sometime in the past 20 years. The carving was definitely done by a child. The letters were at the height a 10-year-old would reach, and the crude nature of the scratches suggested small hands working with primitive tools. But if Marcus had been in the cave, where was he now? The question hung over the investigation like a dark cloud. Had he died in the cave? Had he somehow escaped? And if he had escaped, where had he been for the past 17 years? Dr. Foster's team worked methodically to document every aspect of the cave. They took photographs, made measurements, collected samples of the limestone where the carving had been made. Forensic specialists were brought in to analyze the scratches, to determine what tool had been used, to estimate how long the carving had been there. The cave system was vast, with multiple chambers and passages that led deep into the mountain. Some passages were filled with water, others had collapsed over the years. The main chamber, where Marcus's name was carved, was relatively accessible, but reaching it required navigating the narrow passage that Jennifer had discovered. Search teams spent days exploring every accessible inch of the cave system. They used advanced equipment, thermal imaging cameras, ground-penetrating radar, sonar mapping devices to search for any sign of Marcus Chun, but they found no bones, no clothing, no evidence of what had happened to the boy who had carved his name into the cave wall. Dr. Foster, a forensic anthropologist as well as a geologist, found more than just the carving. Deeper in the cave system, she discovered what appeared to be a makeshift camp, a small depression in the cave floor that had been lined with pine needles and leaves, bits of fabric that might have been clothing, and scratches on the walls that looked like a child's attempt to keep track of passing time. Someone was living here, she told the assembled team of investigators, for weeks, maybe months. The question is what happened to them and where they went. The makeshift camp was carefully excavated, each item catalogued and analyzed. The fabric scraps were sent to a laboratory for testing. The pine needles were examined for age and origin, and the scratches on the walls were photographed and studied by experts in forensic archaeology. The scratches were particularly intriguing. They appeared to be a primitive calendar, with marks grouped in sets of 7, suggesting that whoever made them was tracking days and weeks. If the markings were accurate, they indicated that someone had been in the cave for approximately 4 months. Sarah Chun insisted on being lowered into the cave herself, despite being nearly 70 and in poor health. The rescue team tried to dissuade her, but she was adamant. She needed to see where her son had been, to touch the place where he had carved his name. He was here, she whispered, touching the carved letters with trembling fingers. My baby was here. He was alive, and he was here. The emotion in her voice was heartbreaking. After 17 years of searching, of hoping, of refusing to give up, she finally had proof that Marcus had survived the initial disappearance. But the relief was tempered by the knowledge that he had been alone, scared, and calling for help in a place where no one could hear him. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How had Marcus ended up in the cave? The entrance was hidden and difficult to access, not the kind of place a 10-year-old would stumble into accidentally. How had he survived for what appeared to be months? And most disturbing of all, if he had been alive in the cave, why hadn't he been found during the original search? Detective Michael Santos, who had inherited the case from Detective Torres, began reinvestigating with fresh eyes. He was a methodical man in his 40s, with 15 years of experience in missing persons cases. He had studied the original Chun investigation thoroughly and was determined to find answers that had eluded previous investigators. Santos interviewed everyone who had been involved in the original search, including retired park rangers, volunteers, and law enforcement officers. What he discovered was troubling. The cave system had been known to exist during the original investigation, but search teams had been told it was inaccessible to a child. The cave entrance was accessible 17 years ago, Santos told the assembled media. The rockfall that covered it happened sometime after the initial search. That means search teams could have found this cave during the original investigation, but they were told it wasn't worth exploring. The revelation sparked controversy and recrimination. Families of other missing children demanded to know if their cases had been mishandled as well. The original investigators defended their decisions, pointing out that they had limited resources and had to make difficult choices about where to focus their efforts. But Thomas Hartley, the park ranger who had been first on the scene, came forward with a confession that changed everything. He had known about the cave entrance 17 years earlier, but he had been ordered not to explore it by his supervisor, who believed it was too dangerous for search teams and too inaccessible for a child. "I wanted to check it," Hartley told Detective Santos. "I had a feeling about it, but I was told to focus on the surface search, that we didn't have the resources for a cave rescue operation. I've regretted that decision every day since." The admission was devastating for the Chun family. Marcus had been in the cave, alive and calling for help, while search teams focused on other areas. If they had explored the cave system during the original investigation, they might have found him in time to save him. Dr. Foster's analysis of the makeshift camp suggested that whoever had lived there had been resourceful and intelligent. They had brought in materials from outside pine needles for bedding, what appeared to be remnants of modern clothing, and scratches on the walls that might have been attempts to make tools or weapons. But the most chilling discovery was a series of scratches that looked like a calendar, marking off days with the systematic precision of someone trying to maintain their sanity in isolation. If the markings were accurate, someone had been in the cave for approximately 4 months after Marcus's disappearance. If these are days, Dr. Foster explained to the Chun family, then someone was in this cave for approximately 120 days. That's 4 months of survival in conditions that would challenge even experienced cavers. The news devastated the Chun family. Marcus had been alive for 4 months after his disappearance, trapped in a cave system 2 miles from where hundreds of people had been searching for him. He had been marking off days, maintaining hope, waiting for rescue that never came. But the mystery deepened when Dr. Foster made another discovery. Carbon dating of organic materials in the cave suggested that someone had been living there more recently than 17 years ago. Some of the materials appeared to be only 5 or 6 years old, indicating that the cave had been used as a shelter multiple times over the years. "It's possible," Dr. Foster explained carefully, "that whoever was in this cave initially returned later, or that someone else used this space more recently. The evidence suggests intermittent use over many years." The implications were staggering. If Marcus had somehow survived and escaped the cave, where had he been for the past 17 years? And if he had returned to the cave, why? Was he living in the wilderness, surviving on his own, afraid to return to civilization? Elena Chun Santos watched her husband struggle with this new information. Daniel had built a life around the certainty that his brother was gone, that he had been 10 years old when he died, that there was nothing more they could have done. Now, faced with the possibility that Marcus might have been alive, might still be alive, Daniel was falling apart. "He could be out there," Daniel said one night, standing at their bedroom window, staring out at the darkness. "He could be 27 years old now, living somewhere in the wilderness. and we never found him. He could have been watching us. Search for him, too afraid to come forward. Elena held him as he cried for the first time since their wedding day. She had never seen her husband so broken, so consumed by guilt and regret. The man she loved was tearing himself apart with possibilities and what-ifs, and she didn't know how to help him heal. "We'll find him," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "If he's out there, we'll find him." The FBI investigation expanded to include missing persons reports from across the country. They were looking for any young man who might be Marcus Chun, now grown up. The search was complicated by the fact that if Marcus had been living rough, surviving in the wilderness, he might not have any official documentation. He might be homeless, or living under an assumed name, or simply staying off the grid. Agent Rebecca Martinez, who had taken over the case from the local FBI office, was experienced in long-term missing persons cases. She understood that people who disappeared as children often had complex reasons for staying hidden, even when they reached adulthood. "If Marcus Chun is alive," she told the family, "he's had 17 years to create a new identity, to build a life away from his past. Finding him won't be easy, and even if we do find him, he might not want to be found." A possibility that Marcus might be alive but choosing to stay hidden was almost more painful than believing he was dead. At least death offered a kind of finality, a way to grieve and move forward. But the possibility that he was out there, living alone, afraid to come home, was a different kind of torture. Meanwhile, the cave continued to yield secrets. A second team of spelunkers, led by experts in underground rescue operations, discovered additional passages that had been missed during the initial survey. Some of these passages showed signs of recent use footprints in the mud, scratches on the walls, and even what appeared to be a more sophisticated campsite. The new campsite was unlike the primitive shelter where Marcus's name had been carved. This one showed signs of planning and preparation, a sleeping area with modern materials, empty food cans, and even a small solar panel that had been somehow lowered into the cave system through a previously unknown entrance. Someone has been using this cave as a home, Detective Santos announced at a press conference. "We believe they may have been living here intermittently for years, possibly decades. The level of organization suggests this isn't a temporary shelter, but a permanent residence." The discovery of the solar panel was particularly significant. It suggested that whoever was living in the cave had access to modern technology and had been planning for long-term habitation. The solar panel was connected to a small battery system that could power LED lights and possibly charge electronic devices. Dr. Foster's team also found evidence of food storage canned goods, dried foods, and water purification tablets. Someone had been preparing for extended stays in the cave, stockpiling supplies like a survivalist preparing for the apocalypse. But most intriguingly, they found books. Modern paperback novels, field guides to local flora and fauna, and even what appeared to be a journal, though the pages were too damaged by moisture to read. "This isn't someone who stumbled into the cave," Dr. Foster explained to the assembled investigators. "This is someone who chose to live here, someone who was planning and preparing for it." The level of sophistication suggests education, intelligence, and long-term thinking. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Thomas Hartley, now 73 and long retired, came forward with information he'd kept secret for nearly 2 decades. Hartley had been haunted by the Marcus Chun case for years, and the discovery of the carved name had finally convinced him to reveal what he'd witnessed. "I saw him," Hartley told Detective Santos, "about 6 months after the boy went missing. I was doing a routine patrol in the area, and I saw someone in the forest, someone small, like a child or a teenager. But when I called out, they ran. I tried to follow, but they vanished into the trees like they knew every inch of the forest." Hartley had reported the sighting to his supervisors, but by then the official search had been called off. The FBI had moved on to other cases, and the local police assumed it was just another false lead. Hartley had been told to let it go, to stop chasing shadows. But I kept seeing him, Hartley continued, his voice heavy with regret. Over the years, maybe 4 or 5 times. Always at a distance. Always running when he saw me. I started leaving food sometimes, in places where I'd seen him. Canned goods, energy bars, warm clothing. The food would be gone when I came back. The revelation that Marcus might have been living in the forest for years, possibly decades, changed everything. If he had survived the cave, if he had learned to live in the wilderness, then he might still be out there, hiding from the world that had failed to find him when he needed help. Hartley's confession opened a floodgate of similar reports. Other park rangers, hikers, and local residents came forward with stories of encounters with a mysterious figure in the forest. The sightings spanned nearly 15 years, always describing someone who seemed to know the forest intimately, who could disappear into the trees without leaving a trace. A pattern emerged from the reports. The figure was always described as small and quick, with long dark hair and clothing that looked homemade or improvised. They were never seen during the day, always at dawn or dusk, always alone. Attempts to approach or communicate were met with immediate flight. It's like he's been living parallel to us, one ranger told Detective Santos, in the same forest, but in a different world. He knows we're here, but he doesn't want any contact. The psychological profile that emerged was of someone who had been traumatized at a young age, who had learned to survive in isolation, and who had developed an intense fear of human contact. If Marcus had indeed survived his ordeal in the cave, the experience might have left him unable to trust other people, unable to believe that help would come if he called for it. Daniel John Santos couldn't sleep. He took extended leave from his job as a park ranger and spent every day in the forest, calling his brother's name, leaving food and supplies in places where the mysterious figure had been sighted. Elena worried about him, but she understood. If there was even a chance that Marcus was alive, Daniel would never forgive himself for not looking. The search for Marcus Chun, now a grown man, became a national obsession. Social media was flooded with theories and supposed sightings. Someone claimed to have seen a wild man living in the forests of Oregon. A hiker in Colorado reported encountering a man who wouldn't speak and ran away when approached. A truck driver in Montana swore he'd seen someone matching Marcus's description hitchhiking along a remote highway. Each lead was investigated thoroughly and came to nothing. The FBI established a dedicated hotline for tips, and agents followed, up on hundreds of reported sightings. But none of them led to Marcus Chun. Dr. Foster's team made one final discovery in the cave that changed everything. Hidden behind a false wall, created by carefully stacked rocks, they found a small chamber that had been sealed off from the rest of the cave system. Inside, protected from moisture and time, they discovered a cache of personal items. The items were heartbreaking in their simplicity. A child's jacket that Sarah Chun immediately recognized as Marcus's. A small toy elephant that had been his favorite since toddlerhood. And most importantly, a notebook wrapped in plastic bags to protect it from moisture. The notebook was in remarkable condition, its pages filled with writing that spanned years. The first entries were in a child's handwriting, crude letters that spelled out simple words with the determination of someone fighting to maintain their sanity. Day 1, I fell down a hole. It's dark and my leg hurts real bad. I can't find the way out. I'm scared, but I have to be brave like Daniel. Day 3, I found water dripping from the ceiling. It tastes funny, but I'm so thirsty. The dark is scary, but I made a little fire with matches from my pocket. Mom always said to carry matches when camping. Day 5. My leg is better, but still hurts. I found some worms and ate them. They taste terrible, but I'm so hungry. I wish I had Mom's pancakes. Day 7. I explored more today. There are lots of tunnels. Some have water, some are too small. I made marks on the walls so I don't get lost. I carved my name too, in case someone finds me. The entries continued for weeks, documenting a 10-year-old survival in conditions that would challenge experienced cavers. Marcus had been resourceful, finding ways to stay warm, to locate food, to create light. He had tried repeatedly to find his way out, exploring different passages, calling for help until his voice gave out. Day 15. I found some roots that taste okay. And there are bugs everywhere. I don't like eating them, but they make my stomach stop hurting. I pretend they're chicken nuggets. Day 22. I heard voices today. People calling my name. I screamed. And screamed, but they didn't hear me. The voices went away. I cried for a long time after that. Day 23. I dream about Mom's pancakes and Dad reading me stories. I hope Daniel isn't sad. I hope they know I'm trying to come home. Day 31. I've been here a whole month. I made a calendar on the wall. I'm getting better at finding food. There are fish in one of the pools. I caught one with my hands. The entries became more sophisticated as weeks passed, showing a child adapting to his environment, learning to survive. Marcus had discovered edible plants that grew near the cave entrance, learned to catch small fish and crustaceans that lived in the underground streams, and figured out how to preserve food for lean times. Day 45. I found a way up to a crack. In the ceiling, I can see sky, but it's too high and too narrow. I tried to climb, but I fell and hurt my arm. I wish I could tell them I'm okay. I wish I could go home. Day 52. I'm getting stronger. I can catch fish better now. I found some berries growing where the sunlight comes through the crack. They're sour, but they're food. Day 6-7, I made a rope from plant fibers like Dad taught me. But it's not long enough to reach the crack. I need more plants. I'm going to keep trying. Day 78. I heard helicopters today. They were so close. I screamed until my throat hurt, but they didn't hear me. The sound echoed weird in the cave. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I have to be strong. Day 89. I think I'm getting sick. I feel hot and dizzy. I drank some bad water yesterday. I'm scared. What if I die here and nobody ever finds me? Day 95. I'm better now. I was sick for almost a week. I thought I was going to die. I threw up a lot and couldn't eat, but I'm okay now. I'm going to be more careful about the water. The most heartbreaking entries were the ones where Marcus wrote about missing his family, about the guilt he felt for disappearing, about his desperate hope that they were still looking for him. Day 102. I wonder if they gave up looking for me. Maybe they think I'm dead. I don't want them to be sad. I want them to know I'm trying to come home. Day 108. I miss Daniel so much. I hope he's not blaming himself. It's not his fault. I wandered too far. I was supposed to stay close, but I saw that big stick, and I wanted to get it for Dad. Day 115. I found another way out today. A tunnel that goes up and up, but it's filled with water, and I can't swim that far. I tried, but I got scared and came back. I almost drowned. Day 118. I'm going to try the water tunnel again tomorrow. I've been practicing holding my breath. If I can't make it, at least I tried. I can't stay here forever. The final entry in. The child's handwriting was dated approximately 4 months after Marcus's disappearance. Day 120. I made it through the water tunnel. I can see the forest, but the opening is on a cliff and I can't get down. I'm going to try to climb down. If something happens to me, I want my family to know I love them. I want them to know I never stopped trying to come home. I want them to know I was brave. But the notebook didn't end there. Years later, the same handwriting, now more mature and confident, appeared again. I'm 18 now. I came back to the cave to get my things, to remember who I was before. I made it out that day 8 years ago, but I was so changed by what happened that I couldn't go back to my old life. I couldn't be that little boy anymore. The mature handwriting continued for pages, documenting a young man's struggle with trauma, with isolation, and with the impossible task of returning to a world that had moved on without him. I lived in the forest for 2 years after I escaped the cave. I was like a wild animal, afraid of every sound, every shadow. I learned to survive in ways that would horrify my parents. I ate things that would make normal people sick. I slept in trees and under rocks. I became something that wasn't quite human anymore. When I was 12, I started watching my family from a distance. I saw them at the memorial service the school held for me. I saw my mother crying, my father's face like stone, Daniel looking lost and guilty. I wanted to run to them, to tell them I was alive, but I was too afraid. What if they didn't want me anymore? What if I was too different, too damaged? I've been living in the margins ever since. I work odd jobs, always moving, always careful, not to get too close to anyone. I've learned to read and write better by studying books I find. I've learned about the world through newspapers and magazines people throw away. But I've never learned how to be normal again. The entries revealed a young man haunted by his past, struggling with severe trauma and an inability to trust others. Marcus had survived his ordeal in the cave, but the experience had left him fundamentally changed, unable to reconnect with the world he'd been torn from. I watched them sometimes, my family. Daniel became a park ranger, just like I dreamed we would when we were kids. He's married now, has children of his own. Mom never remarried after Dad died. She still looks for me, even after all these years. She drives through towns showing my picture to strangers. It breaks my heart. I want to go home, but I don't know how. How do you explain 17 years of absence? How do you tell people that you've been living in the forest like an animal? How do you admit that you were too afraid to come forward, too broken to trust you would be welcomed back? Sometimes I leave things for them to find. A flower on Dad's grave. A note in Mom's car that just says, I'm okay. I sign it, and hope she understands. I want her to know I'm alive without having to face the questions, the explanations, the look in her eyes when she sees what I've become. The notebook revealed the full tragedy of Marcus's story. He had survived the unsurvivable, escaped from what should have been certain death, only to find himself trapped in a different kind of prison, the isolation of someone too traumatized to rejoin the world. I've been back to the cave many times. Over the years, it's the only place that feels like home now. I've made it more comfortable, brought in supplies, created a proper shelter. When the world becomes too much, when I can't handle being around people, I come back here. It's where I feel safe. I know it's not healthy. I know I need help. But how do you ask for help when you don't exist on paper? I have no social security number, no identification, no official record of my existence. I'm a ghost, a shadow, a story that people tell around campfires. The entries became darker as Marcus aged, revealing struggles with depression, with physical illness, and with the crushing weight of isolation. I'm 25 now, and I think I'm sick, really sick. I've been coughing up blood, losing weight, feeling weak all the time. I think it might be cancer. All those years of eating whatever I could find, drinking questionable water, living in caves and sleeping rough, it's finally catching up with me. I went to a free clinic in Portland once, but I ran when they asked for ID. How do you explain that you're a missing person who's been presumed dead for 15 years? How do you tell them that you've been living in the forest like a wild animal? I've been thinking about dying a lot lately. Not suicide. I fought too hard to live to give up now. But I think about what it would be like to just stop, to not have to carry this burden anymore, to not have to wonder every day if I made the right choice by staying away. The final entries were the most heartbreaking, written by a man who knew he was dying and was trying to make peace with his choices. I'm 27 now, and I know I don't have much time left. The sickness is getting worse. I can barely eat, can barely breathe sometimes. I've been thinking about going home, about revealing myself to my family, but I'm too weak now. I missed my chance. I want them to know that I love them, that I thought about them every day. I want them to know that I survived because they taught me to be strong, to never give up, to find a way even when there seemed to be no way. I want them to know that the little boy who disappeared in the forest never really died. He just learned to live in a different way. I've been writing letters to each of them, trying to explain why I stayed away, why I couldn't come home. But every letter I write sounds like an excuse, like I'm trying to justify the unjustifiable. How do you explain 17 years of absence? How do you apologize for the pain you've caused by staying alive? I'm going to leave this notebook where someone will find it someday. Maybe it will help them understand. Maybe it will give them some kind of closure. I hope they can forgive me for not being brave enough to come home. I hope they can understand that some wounds are too deep to heal, that some kinds of brokenness can't be fixed with love alone. The notebook was signed Marcus Chun, aged 27, still trying to find his way home. The discovery of the notebook devastated the Chun family. Sarah Chun, now faced with the full knowledge of her son's survival and suffering, couldn't bear the weight of it. She had spent 17 years looking for him, never knowing that he was watching her from the shadows, leaving her small signs of his presence, too afraid to reveal himself. He was alive, she whispered to Daniel as they sat in the cave, where Marcus had hidden his most precious possessions. He was alive all these years, and he was suffering, and I couldn't help him. I couldn't save him. Daniel was overwhelmed by a complex mix of emotions, grief, rage, relief, and an overwhelming sense of failure. His brother had survived the cave, had grown to adulthood, had lived for 17 years, and Daniel had never found him. All those years of searching, all those sleepless nights, all that guilt in Marcus had been right there, in the forest, watching them grieve for him. He could have come home, Daniel said, his voice breaking. He could have trusted us. We would have helped him. We would have understood. But Elena, reading through the notebook with tears streaming down her face, understood what Daniel couldn't yet accept. He was just a child when it happened, she said gently. A traumatized child who learned to survive in ways that changed him fundamentally. By the time he was old enough to understand what he'd lost, he was too different to believe he could reclaim it. The notebook revealed that Marcus had been living in the forest for most of his adult life, surviving through a combination of wilderness skills, odd jobs, and the occasional help from strangers who never knew his true identity. He had watched his family from a distance, learning about their lives but never participating in them. But Dr. Foster had one more revelation. Her team had found evidence in the cave that suggested Marcus hadn't been alone in his final years. There were signs of medical care, supplies that suggested someone had been helping him, caring for him as he died. Someone was with him, she told the family. Someone who knew he was sick and stayed with him through the end. The evidence suggests professional medical care, proper medications, sterile supplies, even what appears to be IV equipment. The mystery of who had been with Marcus in his final days remained unsolved until Thomas Hartley came forward with another confession. The retired park ranger had been carrying more secrets than just the sightings of Marcus over the years. I wasn't just leading food for him, Hartley admitted to Detective Santis. About 5 years ago, I realized he was sick, really sick. I could see it in the way he moved, the way he looked. I started leaving medical supplies, pain medications, anything I thought might help. But Hartley revealed that he hadn't acted alone. His daughter, Rebecca Hartley, was a registered nurse who had been working in the area for the past decade. When her father told her about Marcus, about the sick young man living in the forest, she had insisted on helping. She's been caring for him for the past 2 years, Hartley explained. Not just as a nurse, but as a friend. She was the only person he trusted, the only one he would let close enough to help him. Rebecca Hartley, now 35 and working as a hospice nurse, came forward to tell the final chapter of Marcus's story. She had been providing end-of-life care to the man she knew only as Mike, never knowing his true identity until the discovery of the notebook. He was dying of lung cancer, Rebecca explained to the Chun family, probably caused by years of exposure to cave dust, poor nutrition, and living rough. When I first met him, he was so suspicious, so afraid of being trapped or betrayed. It took months for him to trust me enough to let me help him. Rebecca had been providing Marcus with pain medication, nutritional supplements, and companionship during his final months. She had sat with him during his worst days, had held his hand when the pain was too much to bear, had been the closest thing to family he had allowed himself to have. He talked about you all the time, she told Sarah and Daniel. About his mother, who never stopped looking for him. About his brother who became a park ranger. About his father who died of a broken heart. He loved you so much, but he was convinced that you were better off without him. He made me promise not to tell anyone about him until after he was gone, Rebecca continued through her tears. He was so afraid of hurting you more than he already had. He thought you had moved on, that revealing himself would just reopen old wounds. Rebecca led them to Marcus's final resting place, a small clearing in the forest where she had buried him according to his wishes. The grave was marked with a simple stone that read, Marcus Chon, beloved son and brother. He never stopped loving you. The burial had taken place just 6 months earlier, meaning that Marcus had died while the cave was being explored, while his name was being discovered, while his family was learning that he had survived. The timing was cruel, but somehow fitting Marcus had held on just long enough for his story to be told, for his family to understand what had happened to him. The Chun family held a proper funeral for Marcus, 17 years after his disappearance and 6 months after his death. The service was attended by hundreds of people, family, friends, park rangers, FBI agents, and strangers who had been touched by his story. Daniel spoke at the service, reading from his brother's notebook. Marcus wrote that he survived because we taught him to be strong. But the truth is, he was the strongest person I've ever known. He survived things that would have broken most people. He lived alone for 17 years, but he never let go of love. He never stopped being our Marcus, even when he couldn't remember how to be anyone's son or brother. Elena Chon Santos spoke about the importance of mental health support for trauma. Survivors, about the need for systems that help people reconnect with society after life-altering experiences. Marcus survived the cave, she said, but he couldn't survive the isolation. We need to make sure that other survivors don't fall through the cracks the way he did. Sarah Chun, now 85 and frail, spoke last. I looked for him for 17 years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I drove thousands of miles, showed his picture to countless strangers, never gave up hope. I was looking for my 10-year-old boy, but my 10-year-old boy grew up without me. He became a man I never got to know, faced challenges I never got to help him with, lived a life I never got to share. But he was still my son, she continued. tears streaming down her face. Even when he couldn't come home, even when he was too afraid to trust that we would still love him, he was still my baby. I wish I could have told him that. I wish I could have held him one more time. The case was officially closed, but the questions it raised continued to resonate. How many other missing children might be out there, living in the margins, too afraid, or too broken to come home? How many families are still searching for someone who is hiding in plain sight, convinced that they are better off staying lost? Detective Santos established a new protocol for missing persons cases, one that included ongoing searches of cave systems and wilderness areas, but also outreach programs for people living off the grid. The Marcus John case had taught them that sometimes the missing don't want to be found, and that survival can take forms they never imagined. The discovery also led to changes in how search and rescue operations are conducted. Cave systems are now routinely explored during missing persons investigations, and thermal imaging technology is used to detect signs of life in areas that would otherwise be considered inaccessible. Elena Chan Santos gave birth to a third child 2 years later, a boy they named Marcus. When he was old enough to understand, Daniel told him about his uncle, about the boy who disappeared in the forest, and the man who learned to live with the trees and the stones as his family. Uncle Marcus was brave, Daniel would tell his son. He survived when surviving should have been impossible. He lived when living was too hard, and he loved us even when he couldn't be with us. Will you tell me more about him? Young Marcus would ask. Every day, Daniel promised. Every day. The cave where Marcus had lived became a memorial site, protected by the National Park Service. Visitors can see the original carving Marcus. Chun, age 10, helped me and read the story of the boy who vanished and the man who chose to remain hidden. The cave serves as a reminder that sometimes the most tragic stories are the ones about survival, about the choices we make when hope seems lost. A bronze plaque at the entrance reads, "In memory of Marcus Chun, who survived the unsurvivable but could never find his way home." His story reminds us that some wounds are too deep to heal alone, and that love sometimes means letting go of what we think we need in order to give what is truly needed. Sarah Chun's Foundation, now run by Elena and Daniel, continues to help families of missing children, but it has expanded to include support for people living off the grid, for those who want to return to society but don't know how. They've created safe houses and counseling programs, legal aid for people without documentation, and medical care for those who have been surviving on the margins. The foundation has helped dozens of people reconnect with their families, has provided resources for trauma survivors, and has changed the way law enforcement approaches cases involving people who have been missing for extended periods. They've learned that coming home isn't always as simple as walking through the door, that some kinds of damage require patience and understanding to heal. Rebecca Hartley became a spokesperson for the foundation, sharing her experience of caring for Marcus in his final days. "He taught me that love doesn't always look the way we think it should," she says. "Sometimes love is staying away to protect the people you care about. Sometimes love is accepting that you can't fix everything, that some kinds of brokenness become part of who you are." The forest around Whispering Pines still holds its secrets, but now it holds Marcus's story too. Park rangers report that the strange sounds, the laughter, the humming have stopped. The forest has finally let its lost child rest. But new stories have taken their place, stories of people who visit the memorial cave and find the courage to reconnect with families they thought they'd lost forever. Dr. Foster's research team continues to study the cave system, but now they're also studying the psychological aspects of long-term survival in isolation. Their work has contributed to a better understanding of how trauma affects the brain, how people adapt to extreme circumstances, and how society can better support those who have survived the UNSURVIVABLE. The Marcus Chun case has become a textbook. Example in criminal justice programs, psychology courses, and social work training. It's a story that challenges assumptions about missing persons, about survival, and about the complex relationship between trauma and healing. But for the Chun family, it's simply the story of a little boy who got lost and couldn't find his way home. Marcus Chun disappeared at age 10 while collecting firewood, survived 17 years in the wilderness, and died at 27, still carrying the love of the family he was too afraid to return to. His story reminds us that some disappearances are not endings but transformations, that love can survive even the deepest darkness, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is accepting that we cannot save everyone, no matter how much we want to. The boy who vanished in the forest had become something more than what he was: a story, a memory, a lesson about the resilience of the human spirit and the tragic cost of survival. And in the end, that story brought him home, not to the family he had lost, but to a place of understanding where love transcends death and forgiveness transcends time. On quiet autumn mornings, when the light filters through the trees just right, visitors to the memorial cave say they can hear something. Not the lonely sounds of a lost child, but the gentle whisper of wind through the leaves, carrying with it the peace of a soul finally at rest. Marcus Chun had spent 17 years trying to find his way home, and in the end, through the telling of his story, he had found it at last. The legacy of Marcus Chun lives on in every missing person who is found, every family that is reunited, every survivor who finds the courage to trust again. His name, carved into the cave wall in the desperate hope of rescue, became a beacon for others lost in their own darkness, a reminder that even in the deepest caves, love finds a way to shine. Through and sometimes that's enough. Sometimes being remembered is the same as being found, and sometimes the most profound act of coming home is teaching others that home is not a place, but a feeling, not a destination, but a journey, not an ending, but a beginning of understanding. That love, like light, can reach into the darkest places and guide us back to each other.